In order to understand the public education system and why we have one, you really only have to understand one word: monopoly. A monopoly is a situation in which a commodity or service is controlled by one group or one person. When this occurs, competitors are virtually eliminated, and the group or person with control of the monopolized service or commodity sets the agenda for the service or commodity being monopolized. Simply put, a monopoly is when a small group or a person controls a service in the interest of their own personal gain or manipulation. If your government controls public education, then public education is being monopolized and controlled by the government, and the government is setting the agenda of public education. Let me begin by suggesting that perhaps the main role of public education is not to educate you. Allow me to tell you a few things about my own experience in the public education system as I remember them, in order to help you understand why I have made that suggestion. What I can recall quite clearly is that I was a C and D student. However, this is not because I was stupid. To understand why this occurred, we only have to look at the curriculum which was being taught. Without mentioning any specifics about it, I can say with absolute certainty that what I was being taught was the very same thing that everyone else was being taught in my class, along with me. For those of us who have experienced public education, we will recall that we were all taught the same information in a mass population of students in the same method by one teacher who had the authority to pass or fail us, depending on our ability to memorize, recall, and recite information. If you will remember back to your own experience, you may recall that in certain classes and courses, debate between the teacher and students about the information being presented was discouraged, if not forbidden altogether. You are being given information which you are not supposed to think objectively about, but were only to accept as true. As I remember it, it was not an environment where free thought was encouraged, or where different ideas could be discussed freely and openly without the fear of majority ridicule or punishment of some sort for questioning the information which the teacher was presenting. What I eventually found in this was a cycle of boredom, confusion, and disinterest. I did not care to learn about mathematical equations which were required, but which I also understood were not really practical, and which only a small percentage of any of us would probably ever use. Also, I noticed that I spent a lot of time at school. About 7.5 to 8 hours were spent at school every day, Monday through Friday. In addition to all of this time spent at school, I had what was called homework. Homework took an additional 2 or 3 hours of my day when I did choose to do it, and it stripped away more of the time which I could have spent with my family, learning about what my parents believed was truly important in life and why. The studying of homework was an additional 15 hours every week spent memorizing the information which had been presented to me at school. So in total, I would have been working more than most adults do at a full-time job, putting in almost 55 hours of effort every week trying to please my teachers at school, just as an employee tries to please his employer in the workplace. But how much time would that leave for the average student to spend with their family? The answer is about 4, possibly 5 hours per day, compared to the nearly 11 hours being spent memorizing the information which were given at school. But also, some of the remaining 4 or 5 hours was spent with friends after school. So how much time is really spent with the family? You decide. In this situation, many children don't really have parents in the traditional sense, neither do they view them in a traditional way. Instead, what they do have is friendly strangers who they live with. These friendly strangers are understood to be mother and father, but usually only by title. When this occurs, respect for parents is lost, and values and traditions of earlier generations are often lost or ignored by the younger generation. Moral behavior in society often suffers as a result of the lack of closeness between children and their parents. The role models which children often look to come from the entertainment industry, and children imitate the characters which they see and hear on television and movies, and they expect reality to be the same as fiction. When this occurs, traditional morality is redefined or exchanged for a new definition of morality, and views about one's purpose in life are also redefined by popular culture, which seems to get worse and worse with every passing year as a result. Popular culture seen in movies and television becomes a way of life for an entire generation. Alternative lifestyles and a departure from traditional values are first presented in movies and television. Then, they become reality for an entire generation of people who find it difficult to communicate in a meaningful way. Most children feel that they must work hard and never question what they are told in order to be accepted by their parents and by society. Their parents, because they want to get good grades in order to please their parents, and society, because good grades lead to a good job and a future of success and prosperity. People who evaluate, question, and disagree with the information given to them are usually seen as disruptive to the existing social order, and they are usually failed by their teachers, and go on to work at jobs which pay very little. It would then seem that the biggest role of public education is to train people to work hard and believe what they are told. Because this system seems to blend all people groups into one mold, we would expect that it cannot give specific recognition to any of them individually. This may be why a child learns about history only in a selective sense. History in today's classroom is taught only in terms of events which have occurred in the past, and a memorization of the events. While the appropriate dates may be mentioned with the events, the interpretation of the events which occurred often seems to be subject to the prevailing opinion of the social majority. This leads to a selective teaching about history or a complete rewriting of history in order to suit the prevailing social order.
Our generation and prior generations all grew up with patriotism and being patriotic Americans, and it was taught in schools. It was a way of life. I read history books where they had nowadays you got German Americans and Russian Americans. Back then you didn't have that. You had Americans.
As an example of how history is often neglected in the classroom, the Renaissance period, which means rebirth or born again, will be taught in the classroom, but any discussion about why it occurred and the system of beliefs which played a central role in building the type of society necessary for the Renaissance to occur cannot be discussed. Discussion of such belief systems may have the potential to present a particular system of belief in a more favorable light than another system of belief. The same is true of learning the key dates to Hitler's rise to power. Why a nation cheered a man named Adolf Hitler in every step which he took toward totalitarianism cannot be discussed. The belief system, which he thought gave him the right to kill millions of people, cannot be discussed. What these history classes seem to miss is that it does not matter when Hitler came to power if we do not also know the reasons that he came to power and what his political motives were. Why would we need to know the dates of the events if we don't understand why he thought the way that he did and where he got his ideas from? These details are not discussed because they may portray a particular system of beliefs in an unfavorable way. In a public school, you can know a lot of facts, but you rarely know the reasons that they are factual. In today's world, parents with religious beliefs are often at odds with the public school system. Their children are being taught something contrary to their own ideas and beliefs about what is important in their own life and the lives of their children, and in the mind of the child this causes confusion. They understand that the teacher in the classroom is an authority figure who represents knowledge, but they also understand that their parents are an authority. So the child must struggle to decide who is correct and who is not correct in the ensuing debate. But even putting religious beliefs aside, children are also being taught about such things as sexuality in school. This is not something which is suggested, but rather it is mandatory. If a parent does not agree with the state's presentation of sex education, and an explanation of what sex is, and under what conditions it is permissible, the parent must sign a form to have an option for their child not to be present at the sex education classes. If you want to change the thoughts and beliefs of an entire society, you could really only do it through the education system. The minds of children are easy to control because children tend to believe whatever you tell them to believe if they view you as an authority or a reliable source. But let's hear from renowned educator, philosopher, and scientist Noam Chomsky and get his opinion about the whole issue of education and the role it fulfills in society.
You said a lot about the role of the media in a so-called democracy. I'm wondering how you see the role of our educational system, what it's doing right now, what forces are driving it, and what constraints are on it, and how should it operate?
Well, I quoted the Trilateral Commission view of the educational system, namely it's a system of indoctrination of the young. And I think that's correct. It's a system of indoctrination of the young. That was the way the liberal elites regard it, and they're more or less accurate. So the educational system is supposed to train people to be obedient, conformist, not think too much, do what you're told, stay passive, don't cause any crises of democracy, don't raise any questions, and so on. That's basically what the system is about. And I think that's the purpose, really. I mean, the purpose is just to impose authority. You know, here's the great thoughts, all this other stuff is rubbish, just learn those and you're okay. I'll pick them, you memorize them. That's basically the line. Now, of course, that's the opposite of education.